The old debris probe had been floating dead in space for over a decade, and nobody wanted the job of hauling it in except a crew desperate enough to fly near a place most pilots avoided on purpose. Daniel Osei sat with his boots propped on a cracked console, reading the job listing for the third time, hoping the numbers would change if he stared hard enough. They did not change. The pay was 3 times the normal rate, and that alone told him something was wrong with the job. Priya Nair leaned over his shoulder and read the listing upside down, which was a skill she had picked up from years of living on a ship where nothing was ever placed the right way up for her. She whistled low when she saw the location marked on the star chart. It was not a place with a name. It was a place with a warning. "That's the nest system," she said. "Ships go in, ships don't come out. You know this." Daniel did know this. Everyone in this part of space knew the stories, the kind told in docking bays and cargo holds, always by someone who swore they knew a guy who knew a guy who almost went there. Massive shapes moving under storm clouds. Heat signatures too large to belong to anything natural. Scanners that turned to static the moment a ship got close enough to matter. Katrina Volkov was the youngest of the 3, barely 2 years into her post as navigator, and she had spent the last several nights doing what she always did when she was nervous, which was research everything until the fear had nowhere left to hide. She walked into the room, now holding a data pad covered in notes, her dark hair pulled back tight, her expression somewhere between excited and terrified. "I found old Navy logs," she said. 3 different Alliance fleets tried surveying that system over the last century. All 3 lost contact. No wreckage was ever found. Not one piece. "So naturally," Priya said, "someone thinks it's a great idea to pay us a fortune to fly a rusted salvage ship into the one place actual warships disappeared." Daniel rubbed his jaw and looked at the 2 of them, weighing the fear against the number on the contract. The truth was, the Wayfinder needed the money badly. Their last 3 jobs had barely covered fuel, and the ship's hull was held together with patches older than Katrina. A payout like this could fix everything that was breaking, and it could keep them flying for another year instead of grounded and broke on some dock somewhere, waiting for a job that never came. "We're not going into the system," Daniel said. "We're grabbing a probe sitting at the outer edge. In and out, no landing, no exploring. We take the readings, we grab the wreck, we leave." Priya crossed her arms, unconvinced, but she had flown with Daniel long enough to know that once he made a decision, arguing only wasted air. Katrina looked less certain, chewing on the inside of her cheek, but the promise of extra pay had a way of quieting worry, at least for a little while. 3 days later, the Wayfinder dropped out of transit at the very edge of the Forbidden System, close enough to read the old probe's beacon signal, but far enough, Daniel hoped, to stay out of whatever lived deeper in. The system's star burned a strange dull orange, casting long shadows across the ship's console lights. Ahead of them, barely visible through the haze of distant dust clouds, sat the planet everyone feared. Even from this distance, it looked wrong somehow, too still, too quiet, like something enormous was holding its breath. Katrina guided the ship carefully toward the drifting probe, her hands steady despite the sweat on her palms. Priya monitored the engines, watching every gauge twitch, ready to pull them out at the first sign of trouble. Daniel kept his eyes on the planet in the distance, unable to look away from it, though he could not have said why. The retrieval went smoothly at first. The probe's remains were pulled into the cargo bay without incident, and for a moment, all 3 of them allowed themselves to relax, thinking the job might actually be as simple as promised. Then the ship's engines cut out. There was no warning, no failure alarm, no spark or flicker before the lights dimmed. One moment, the engines hummed steady beneath their feet, and the next, silence, total and complete, the kind of silence that made a person's ears ring from the sudden absence of sound they had stopped noticing. "Priya, what happened?" Daniel's voice was calm, but his knuckles were white against the armrest. "Nothing happened," Priya said, staring at her readouts in disbelief. "That's the problem. Everything shows green. The engines aren't broken. They're just off." Katrina's screen lit up with a new reading, one that made her stomach drop. "We're moving," she said quietly. "We're moving toward the planet, and I'm not doing it." Daniel looked out the viewport and saw it too, the planet growing slowly, steadily larger, pulling them in like a great hand reaching out of the dark. No thrusters fired. No force pushed against the hull that any instrument could detect. And yet the Wayfinder moved forward, drawn deeper into the one system every pilot in the galaxy had learned to avoid. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Priya broke the silence, her voice tight. "I don't think we're leaving anytime soon." Daniel did not answer. He just watched the planet grow larger in the viewport, its clouds swirling in slow, deliberate patterns, as if something down there already knew they were coming and had been waiting for them the entire time. Nobody on the Wayfinder slept that night, if night was even the right word for the strange orange dimness that passed for darkness as the ship fell deeper into the atmosphere. Katrina kept her eyes fixed on the controls, flipping switches that did nothing, trying every trick she knew to regain control of a ship that no longer answered to her hands. Priya crouched by the engine access panel, running diagnostic after diagnostic, each one returning the same maddening result. Nothing was broken. The ship simply was not hers to fly anymore. Daniel stood at the front viewport and watched the clouds part below them, thick and swirling, lit from beneath by a dull red glow that looked uncomfortably like fire. He braced himself for impact, certain that whatever force had pulled them in this far intended to finish the job by smashing them into the surface. Instead, the ship slowed, gently, deliberately, as though some invisible hand had wrapped around the hull and was setting it down with the same care a person might use placing a glass on a table. The Wayfinder touched down on a wide stone plateau without so much as a bump. For several seconds, none of the crew moved. They simply stared out the viewport in stunned silence, waiting for something terrible to happen. Nothing did. "That wasn't a crash," Priya finally said. "That was a landing. Somebody landed us." Daniel unbuckled himself and moved toward the hatch controls, his hand hovering over the release. Katrina grabbed his arm. "You are not opening that door," she said. "If they wanted us dead," Daniel said quietly, "we would already be dead. Whatever brought us down here did it carefully. I want to know why." The hatch hissed open, and pale orange light spilled into the cabin. The air outside was thick and warm, carrying a faint metallic smell, like the inside of an old engine room. The three of them stepped out onto the plateau, boots crunching against stone that looked almost polished, too smooth to be natural. What greeted them was not the wild, feral landscape the old stories had described. Rising out of the mountains around them were structures, tall and strange, built into the rock itself rather than standing apart from it. Glowing lines ran along the stone like veins under skin, pulsing faintly with a soft light that shifted color every few seconds. It looked less like a lair and more like a city, ancient and vast, carved directly into the bones of the planet. Katrina's breath caught in her throat as she pointed upward. "Daniel, look!" High above them, moving between two distant peaks, was a shape so large it blotted out a portion of the sky. Scales caught the dim light in shifting patterns of deep red and bronze. Wings, folded tight against a body larger than the Wayfinder itself, cut a silhouette against the clouds. It was not attacking. It was not even approaching quickly. It simply moved, unhurried, powerful, aware. Then it turned its head, and even from that great distance, they could see its eyes. There was nothing empty or animal about that gaze. It was watching them the way a person watches something they have been expecting for a long time. Nobody breathed. The creature held its position for what felt like an eternity, then banked away and vanished behind the mountain, leaving the three of them standing frozen on the plateau, hearts hammering. "That thing looked at us," Priya whispered. "It looked at us like it knew we were coming." Before Daniel could answer, a soft mechanical whir sounded from the edge of the plateau. Small shapes emerged from a gap in the rock, no larger than dogs, built in the same serpentine form as the massive creature above, but clearly constructed rather than born. Metal plating caught the light where scales should have been, and thin lines of glowing circuitry ran down their backs like spines. They moved in careful formation, circling the crew without aggression, more like an escort than a threat. One of the small constructs stopped in front of Daniel and tilted its head, studying him with a single glowing sensor where an eye might have been. Then it turned and began walking toward the gap in the rock, pausing once to look back, as if waiting for them to follow. "I don't think that's a suggestion," Katrina said. Daniel exchanged a glance with Priya, who shrugged in the exhausted way of someone who had long ago stopped expecting normal outcomes from any job involving the word salvage. Together, The three of them followed the small construct into the mountain, leaving their disabled ship behind on the plateau. The tunnel beyond was wide and smooth, lit by the same pulsing veins of light they had seen from outside. As they walked deeper, Katrina noticed something that made her slow her steps. The walls were covered in markings, intricate diagrams that looked almost technical, alongside long columns of symbols that resembled star charts. She stopped in front of one section, tracing a shape with her eyes that looked disturbingly familiar. "Daniel," she said slowly, "I think I recognize some of this." He stepped closer, frowning at the strange script carved into the stone. Buried among the alien symbols were patterns that echoed old mathematical notations, the kind taught in the earliest human schools centuries ago, long before humanity had ever left its home system. It made no sense. It should not have been possible. And yet there it was, carved into the walls of a place no human had ever been allowed to reach. The small construct continued forward, unbothered by their shock, leading them deeper into the mountain toward whatever waited at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel opened without warning into a chamber so large it swallowed the light from the walls entirely, leaving only distant glimmers far above like stars trapped underground. Daniel stopped walking the moment he stepped through the opening, his neck craning back as he tried to take in the sheer size of the space. Priya bumped into him from behind. Too busy staring at the ceiling to notice, she had stopped paying attention to her feet. At the center of the chamber sat something so massive it took a moment for the mind to accept it as a living creature and not part of the mountain itself. Its scales, deep bronze and shadowed red, caught faint light in slow, shifting patterns. Its head alone was larger than the Wayfinder's entire cargo hold. Two eyes, ancient and calm, opened as the crew approached, fixing on them with an intelligence that made Katrina's hand instinctively reach for Daniel's sleeve. A soft hum filled the chamber, and a construct hovering near the great creature's head began to glow, translating sound into words the crew could understand. "You may lower your fear," the voice said, deep and slow, carrying none of the menace they had braced themselves for. "You were not brought here to be harmed." Daniel found his own voice only after a long pause. "Then why were we brought here at all?" "I am called Keeper," the creature said, "and you were brought here because the time for hiding has ended." Priya stepped forward slightly, her scientist curiosity briefly overpowering her caution. "You're not an animal. You're not even really a dragon, are you? You're built." Keeper's massive head tilted, something almost like amusement passing behind those ancient eyes. "Perceptive, for one so young in the galaxy's history. Yes, my kind were built, long before your species learned to shape metal into ships. We are guardians, crafted by hands that no longer exist, given one single purpose that has outlasted the civilization that created us." Katrina found her voice trembling, but pushed the words out anyway. "Guardians of what?" Keeper shifted its enormous weight, and the sound echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. "Beneath this mountain lies the last surviving archive of a people who called themselves the Severin. They were not conquerors. They were builders, healers, keepers of knowledge across 1,000 worlds. And they were destroyed, utterly, by a weapon so complete in its purpose that not one living Severin remains anywhere in the galaxy." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the translation construct. Daniel felt a chill settle over him despite the warm air. "What kind of weapon does that?" he asked quietly. "It was called the Cinder Directive," Keeper said. "A weapon designed not merely to destroy a world, but to unmake the very possibility of life returning to it. The Severin saw its use across a dozen systems before they understood they could not survive it. In their final years, they gathered everything they could preserve, every seed, every record, every fragment of what they had built, and hid it here, in the one place they believed no one would think to look. Then they built us to guard it, and they gave their guardians one final instruction: let the galaxy fear this place, so that fear itself becomes the wall no army can breach." Priya's mind raced, pulling pieces together. "That's why every ship that's come near here disappeared. That's why the scanners always fail. It's not an accident. You've been doing it on purpose. For 300 years. Longer than that," Keeper said. 3 centuries is merely how long your particular alliance has kept records of the fear. We have maintained this secrecy since long before your ancestors first looked up and wondered what lay beyond their own sky." Daniel's thoughts turned uneasily toward the star charts on the tunnel walls, the strange familiar mathematics carved into stone that predated human spaceflight by centuries. The symbols we saw? They looked human. How is that possible? Keeper regarded him for a long moment before answering. That is a question for another time. Human. What matters now is why you were pulled from your ship and brought before me, rather than simply left to pass this system unnoticed as countless ships have done before you. Katrina swallowed hard. Then why us? Because the archive has detected a disturbance, Keeper said, and for the first time, something like genuine concern crept into its ancient voice. Something has been probing the edges of this system for many years, patient, careful, testing our defenses in ways no simple explorer would attempt. We believe they search for what we protect, and we believe they intend to twist it into something far more dangerous than knowledge. So you brought us here because you're in trouble, Priya said slowly, and you need help from outsiders. I brought you here, Keeper said, because my kind were built only to guard, not to fight a modern war, and because your kind carries a reputation across this galaxy for finding solutions where none should exist. I did not choose you by accident, small crew of the Wayfinder. I have watched your species for a long time, from a distance, through the careful gathering of information others assumed unimportant. You are exactly what I need, whether you wanted this task or not. Daniel exchanged a glance with Priya and Katrina, both of whom looked as overwhelmed as he felt. The weight of what they had just heard settled slowly over the three of them. Three simple salvagers standing before an ancient guardian who had just told them they were now tangled in a secret 300 years in the making. What exactly, Daniel asked carefully, do you need us to do? Keeper's eyes narrowed slightly, and the great creature rose, its massive form casting a shadow across the entire chamber. Follow me. It is time you saw what you have truly stumbled into. The path Keeper led them down curved deep beneath the mountain, far past the chamber where they had first met, into tunnels that grew colder and quieter with every step. Katrina kept glancing at the walls as they walked, noticing how the strange markings changed the deeper they went, shifting from technical diagrams into something that looked almost like portraits, faces and figures long faded but still faintly visible in the stone. Those are the Severin, Keeper said, noticing her attention without needing to turn its great head. What remains of their likeness? It is one of the few ways they are still remembered. Katrina slowed to look more closely at one of the faces, its features gentle and thoughtful, carved by hands that had clearly cared about getting the details right. She said nothing, but something in her chest tightened at the thought of an entire people reduced to fading shapes on a wall. The tunnel finally opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first, but no less strange. Instead of stone, the walls here were lined with something smooth and pale, almost like polished bone, etched with patterns of light that pulsed gently in slow rhythm. At the center of the room sat a structure unlike anything the crew had ever seen, part machine, part something closer to a living organism, its surface breathing faintly as though asleep rather than truly powered down. This is the vault's heart, Keeper explained. Within it rests the terraforming intelligence the Severin built in their final years, capable of restoring any world stripped of life, capable of rebuilding what the Cinder Directive destroys. It was meant to be humanity's gift, offered freely once the galaxy proved it had learned to use such power wisely. Priya moved closer, running careful eyes over the structure's surface, her engineer's mind already trying to make sense of designs that predated everything she had ever studied. This isn't a weapon, she murmured. This is the opposite of one. Precisely, Keeper said, and precisely why it must never fall into the wrong hands. In the wrong hands, the same intelligence that restores a dead world could just as easily be twisted to unmake a living one. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. You said something's been probing your defenses. Someone looking for this. Keeper's eyes dimmed slightly, an expression that looked almost like grief passing across its ancient face. For decades, a power known as the Saint Concord has sent quiet scouts along the edges of this system. At first we believed them simple explorers, easily turned away by fear and failed instruments. But their probes have grown more precise with each passing year, testing our defenses with the patience of an enemy who has already decided the prize is worth waiting for. Priya frowned, connecting pieces of information she had heard whispered in trade ports over the years. The St. Concord. They've been building up their fleet for a decade, buying weapons tech nobody asks too many questions about. I always figured it was posturing between rival factions. If they got their hands on something like this, they would not restore worlds, Keeper finished quietly. They would strip this intelligence of its purpose and rebuild it into something far darker. Katrina's voice was barely above a whisper. And you think they're coming now? That's why you pulled us in. Before Keeper could answer, a low tone rippled through the chamber, sharp and urgent, cutting through the calm atmosphere like a blade. The translation construct flickered rapidly, and Keeper's massive body tensed, head snapping toward the tunnel behind them. They are no longer probing, Keeper said, its voice suddenly hard. Long-range sensors detect a fleet-altering course toward this system. Their approach vector is direct. They are no longer testing our defenses. They are coming to take what lies beneath this mountain. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, old instincts from years of dodging trouble kicking in fast. How long do we have? Hours, Keeper said. Perhaps less. Priya ran a hand through her hair, already thinking through problems out loud. Keeper was silent for a moment, and something in that silence told Daniel the answer before it came. My kind were built to guard against curiosity, Keeper admitted. Against explorers, against the occasional greedy scavenger. We were never meant to withstand a modern military assault. Our defenses are ancient, powerful, but rigid, unable to adapt to weapons built centuries after our creation. We are strong. We are not clever. And cleverness, I fear, is exactly what will be needed today. The weight of what Keeper was asking settled over the chamber like a physical thing. Daniel looked to Priya, then to Katrina, both of them already understanding what came next even before Keeper spoke the words aloud. I did not pull your ship from its path by accident, Keeper said, turning its great head to face all three of them directly. I have watched your species improvise where others would surrender, build solutions from scraps where others saw only failure. I am asking you now, honestly, without command or deception, will you help defend what remains of a civilization that can no longer defend itself? Daniel thought of the ship sitting damaged on the plateau above them, of the modest life he had built scraping by on salvage contracts, of every reason he had to simply want to go home and forget any of this had happened. Then he thought of what Priya said only moments ago, about what the St. Concord would do with power like this, and he understood there was no version of walking away that ended well for anyone. We're not soldiers, Daniel said slowly, but we know how to fix things nobody thinks can be fixed. If that's what you need, you've got us. Keeper's ancient eyes studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind them, before the great creature finally lowered its head in something close to a bow. Then let us begin, Keeper said. Time is no longer something we have to spare. Sparks flew across the cavern floor as Priya stripped wiring from a broken defense construct, muttering to herself the way she always did when a problem was too big to solve calmly, and quiet focus was the only thing keeping panic at bay. Around her, dozens of the small serpentine machines lay disassembled in careful rows, their ancient circuitry exposed to open air for the first time in centuries. She had exactly a handful of hours to make sense of technology older than recorded human history, and she intended to use every single minute of it. These systems weren't built for precision strikes, she said, half to herself and half to Katrina, who knelt beside her sorting components into piles based on a system only she understood. They're built to overwhelm. Big, blunt, powerful. Against a fleet with modern targeting, that's not going to be enough. We need to give them precision. Katrina held up a small cylindrical piece, its surface humming faintly with residual energy. What about combining old and new? Our targeting array from the Wayfinder is garbage next to a warship system, but it's built for reading modern shielding patterns. Theirs isn't. Priya's eyes lit up in the way they always did when a piece finally clicked into place. You're a genius. If we can splice our targeting software into their power grid, we could redirect their raw energy output through modern coordinates. Turn their strength into something they can't predict. Daniel jogged over from across the chamber, sweat on his brow from hauling equipment down from the disabled Wayfinder with a small team of Keeper's constructs assisting him. Tell me you too have something, because Keeper just told me the fleet crossed into the outer system. We're down to maybe 90 minutes. We might have something, Priya said, already grabbing tools. It's reckless, it's untested, and if it fails, we'll have burned our only chance at a real defense. Other than that, it's a great plan. Sounds about right for us, Daniel said, managing a tired grin despite the tension pulling at every muscle in his body. Keeper arrived moments later, its massive form filling the chamber's entrance, watching the frantic work with an expression that mixed disbelief and something close to hope. You intend to merge our defense grid with your ship's systems. That has never been attempted. Everything has a first time, Priya said, not looking up from her work. Your systems know how to hit hard. Ours know how to hit smart. Put them together, and maybe we've got something your enemies won't see coming. Because frankly, nobody's dumb enough to try combining 1,000-year-old alien tech with a scrapyard salvage computer except us. Keeper made a low sound that might have been the closest thing to a laugh its kind was capable of. Then let us be dumb enough together. The next hour passed in a blur of sparks, shouted instructions, and constructs scurrying back and forth carrying components between the vault's ancient defense core and the jury-rigged systems Priya and Katrina assembled from scavenged Wayfinder parts. Daniel worked alongside them, hands blistered and shirt soaked through, doing whatever was needed, holding wires steady, bracing panels, running messages between chambers when the translation constructs were too busy to relay information fast enough. They were still finishing the final connections when the mountain shook for the first time. The tremor rattled dust from the ceiling, and a deep boom echoed through the tunnels, distant but unmistakable. The fleet had arrived. That's them, Katrina said, voice tight but steady. They're testing the outer defenses. Then we don't have time to finish properly, Priya said, sliding the last cable into place and sealing the connection with hands that trembled only slightly. This is going live whether it's ready or not. Keeper's voice boomed through the chamber, carrying an authority that had not been heard in centuries. All Guardians, prepare for engagement. Hold nothing back. The ground shook harder as, far above, the mountain's ancient defenses stirred to life. Massive constructs rising from hidden hollows across the peaks, their forms catching the dim light like a small army waking from a long sleep. Through a viewing array Priya had hastily connected, the crew watched as dozens of St. Concord warships descended through the atmosphere, weapons already firing down toward the mountain's surface. The first exchange was brutal. Ancient beams of raw energy tore into the incoming ships, and the Guardians' strength was undeniable, but their attacks were wide, unfocused, easily dodged by pilots trained against modern combat patterns. 2 Guardian constructs fell in the opening seconds, crashing into the mountainside in explosions of fire and broken stone. Now, Priya shouted, slamming her hand against the console. Redirect power through the targeting bridge, now. Katrina's fingers flew across the controls, feeding modern coordinates through ancient channels never designed to carry such precise information. For one agonizing second, nothing happened. Then the Guardian's next volley struck true, no longer wide and blind, but sharp, accurate, tearing through shield after shield with newfound precision. It's working, Katrina shouted, disbelief and triumph mixing in her voice. The battle above shifted rapidly. St. Concord ships that had expected an easy fight against ancient, predictable defenses suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered by attacks that adapted, that learned, that hit exactly where their shields were weakest. Daniel watched through the viewing array as one warship after another was forced to break formation, their commanders clearly realizing too late that they had underestimated what waited for them. Keeper's voice rose above the chaos, carrying across every construct connected to the defense grid. Press forward. They are breaking. Within minutes, what had begun as a desperate defense turned into a rout. The St. Concord fleet, its formations shattered and its confidence broken, began pulling back, ships retreating toward the edge of the system faster than they had arrived. The mountain shook one final time as the last Guardian strike sent a fleeing warship's engines sputtering into a wide, desperate arc away from the battlefield. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chamber fell quiet except for the ragged breathing of 3 exhausted humans and the low hum of ancient machinery finally settling. Priya slid down against the console, her hands still shaking, a disbelieving laugh escaping her chest. We just helped fight off an entire fleet with duct tape and 1,000-year-old wiring. Daniel managed a tired smile, sinking down beside her. Wouldn't be the first time we made something work that shouldn't have. Keeper lowered its great head toward them, ancient eyes reflecting something that looked remarkably like gratitude. You have done what my kind alone could not. You have earned more than my thanks today. Smoke still curled from the mountainside, where fallen guardian constructs lay broken among the rocks, but the silence that followed the battle felt different from the silence before it. Where fear had once hung heavy over the nest system for 300 years, something lighter had taken its place, fragile and new, like the first quiet moment after a storm finally passes. Daniel sat on a ledge overlooking the plateau where the damaged Wayfinder still rested, watching repair constructs move methodically across its hull, patching wounds the ship had carried for years, not just the damage from their forced landing. Priya worked nearby with a cluster of the small serpentine machines, occasionally laughing at something one of them did, having apparently grown fond of the strange little creatures over the course of one very long day. Katrina sat cross-legged beside Daniel, still processing everything that had happened, her data pad forgotten in her lap for the first time since they had left port. Keeper approached slowly, its massive form casting a long shadow across the plateau as the system's dull orange sun dipped low behind the mountains. For a long moment, the ancient guardian simply looked out at the horizon, saying nothing, as though gathering thoughts too old and too heavy to rush. For 300 years, Keeper finally said, I told myself that fear was enough, that silence and isolation could protect what remained of the Severin forever. Today proved otherwise. Fear held for a long time, but it was never going to hold forever. Eventually, someone patient enough, determined enough, would find a way through it. Today, that almost happened. Daniel looked up at the Guardian, understanding settling over him slowly. You're saying hiding isn't going to work anymore. I am saying, Keeper replied, that hiding alone was never truly a solution. It only delayed an ending that isolation could not prevent. What saved this vault today was not fear. It was connection. Outsiders willing to stand beside guardians who could not have one alone. Priya wandered over, wiping grease from her hands onto her already ruined shirt, catching the last part of the conversation. So what happens now? You can't keep faking scrambled sensors forever. Word's going to get out eventually that something happened here today. Keeper's ancient eyes shifted toward her, thoughtful. Perhaps it is time that it did. Not recklessly, not to every faction with greedy ambitions, but carefully, beginning with those who have already proven themselves trustworthy. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle over him. You're talking about us. I am talking about your species, Keeper said. I have watched humanity from a distance for longer than any of you have been alive, through fragments of information gathered quietly over the years. Stubborn, resourceful, willing to build solutions from nothing when the situation demands it. Today you proved every observation true. I believe it is time the Vault of the Severin had a connection to the wider galaxy again, and I believe that connection should begin with you three, not with treaties and politics that would only slow everything down with suspicion and greed. Katrina finally looked up from her thoughts, surprise clear on her face. You want to work with us? Just us? Not the Alliance. The Alliance, Keeper said, something almost like dry amusement in its ancient voice, is built from 1,000 competing interests, each one eager to claim advantage over the others. Trust like that offered today is rare in such a place. I would rather build something honest and small than something large and hollow. Daniel exchanged a glance with Priya and Katrina, both of whom seemed to be arriving at the same realization he was. What had begun as a simple salvage job had somehow turned into something far larger than any of them could have imagined, a quiet partnership between a small, worn-out crew and the last guardians of a civilization the galaxy had long since forgotten. We're not diplomats, Daniel finally said. We're not built for that kind of responsibility. Neither were you built for defending an ancient vault against a modern fleet, Keeper replied. And yet here we all are. That night, as the Wayfinder's repairs neared completion under the careful work of Keeper's constructs, Priya approached the Guardian one final time, curiosity still burning in her even after everything the day had thrown at her. Before we leave, I have to ask, those markings we saw, the ones that looked like early human mathematics, what was that about? Keeper was quiet for a long moment, and when it finally answered, Its voice carried a weight that suggested the full truth was far larger than could be explained in one evening. That, engineer, is a story for another visit. Some secrets deserve to be earned slowly, not given away in a single conversation. Priya accepted the answer with a small, satisfied smile, sensing that this particular thread was far from finished, and that Keeper's careful phrasing was less a refusal and more an invitation to return. As dawn broke over the mountain, painting the strange orange sky in soft gold light, the Wayfinder rose slowly from the plateau, its hull gleaming with new plating woven from ancient Guardian technology. Inside, Katrina guided the ship steady through the atmosphere while Priya secured a small sealed data core Keeper had entrusted to her, humanity's first true piece of the vault's long-buried history. As the ship broke free of the planet's pull and turned toward open space, Daniel looked back one final time at the mountain shrinking behind them, the place everyone in the galaxy still believed held nothing but monsters and death. Hours later, at a quiet Alliance sensor station stationed at the very edge of charted space, an operator monitoring the Nest system for the usual static and silence sat up sharply in her chair. For the first time in 300 years of records, a signal was coming through clean and clear from that forbidden system, a short, simple transmission from a small salvage ship nobody had ever heard of. "We are still here. Now you know why." The operator stared at the message for a long time before finally reaching for the comm switch to alert her superiors, unaware that the quiet, careful beginning of something enormous had just been set into motion.